There is a three-digit number that follows you through your entire financial life in America. It decides whether you can buy a house, whether your car loan is affordable, whether a landlord lets you sign a lease. In most states, it decides how much you pay for car insurance. And the difference between a low number and a high number on the exact same $300,000 mortgage works out to more than $87,000 in extra interest over 30 years. Same house, same bank, different number, okay? Most people assume this system was invented by the government, or that it has always existed, or that it is neutral. None of that is true. The credit score, the number from 300 to 850 that decides your financial access, was assembled piece by piece over 150 years by people who were each solving a completely different problem. Nobody was trying to build a social rating system. Nobody designed this to have the power it has. That is the thing that should disturb you most. It got this powerful by accident. The year is 1841, and the most pressing financial problem in America is not a bank crisis or a currency shortage. It is a trust problem. The country is expanding westward fast. Merchants in New York want to extend credit to buyers in Ohio and Indiana and Illinois, but those buyers are strangers. You cannot know a stranger's financial reputation when they are 500 miles away. And the old system where a local banker knew your family personally and your word was your credit breaks down completely when no one knows anyone. All right, a man named Lewis Tappan decides to solve this. Tappan is not some obscure businessman. He is one of the most prominent abolitionists in the country. He helped finance the legal defense of the Amistad captives, a group of Africans who had escaped a Spanish slave ship and were fighting for their freedom in American courts. He is a man who spent his life fighting for human dignity and freedom. He also went bankrupt in the 1820s and got bailed out by his brother, and the Panic of 1837 nearly wiped them both out again. Out of that personal experience of financial ruin, of being blindsided by circumstances you did not control, Tappan built something he believed would bring order to the chaos. He hired attorneys and ministers and prominent citizens in cities across the northern states to quietly investigate their neighbors. Twice a year, these correspondents filed reports on the merchants and businessmen in their communities who had paid their debts, who had new business partners, who had a solid reputation, who had been seen drinking too often. These reports traveled by post to a central office in New York. Here's the part that tells you something about what the system was from the very beginning. Subscribers who paid to access this information had to visit the New York office in person. Clerks would read entries from the ledgers aloud. Nothing was permitted to leave the building in writing. This was the Mercantile Agency, the first commercial credit reporting network in America. Critics in the press called it a new inquisition. A pamphlet published in 1853 used those exact words while Lewis Tappan was still alive. A man named Robert Graham Dunn bought the company in 1859 and expanded it dramatically. By the 1880s, the network had reporters filing from cities across the country. The physical ledgers from that operation, more than 2,500 handwritten volumes recording the financial reputations of American merchants, now sit in the Baker Library at Harvard Business School. You can go read what the correspondents wrote about the people in your ancestors' towns. The Mercantile Agency tracked businesses. What about ordinary consumers? That second piece of the system came from Atlanta, Georgia in 1899. Two brothers named Cator and Guy Wolford ran a grocery store. And like any merchant who extended credit to customers, they had a practical problem. Which customers paid their tabs and which ones did not? They compiled a list. Then they sold that list to other merchants in the city. The business of tracking ordinary consumers' payment behavior had found its first form. Yeah, the company they built was called the Retail Credit Company. It grew, it hired investigators, it expanded into more cities, it built files on more people. And by the 1960s, it had accumulated 45 million files on American consumers. The company that started as a grocery store list in Atlanta had become, within 60 years, one of the most comprehensive private financial surveillance operations in the country. The problem was what the retail credit company put in those 45 million files. Investigators were paid based on the quantity of negative information they found. More dirt meant more pay, and when there was not enough real dirt to fill a report, some investigators fabricated it. The files the company sold to lenders, employers, and insurance companies contained details about people's marriages, their sex lives, their political activities, their mental health history, their neighborhood gossip. Okay? Congress found out. There were hearings. The result was the Fair Credit Reporting Act of 1970, the first data privacy law of the information age, which gave American consumers the legal right to see their credit files and dispute errors for the first time. The retail credit company renamed itself Equifax in 1975, specifically to escape the reputational damage of the scandal. Think about that. The company that is currently one of the 3 gatekeepers of American financial identity renamed itself because its old name had become toxic. The surveillance of ordinary consumers' private lives continued under the new name without interruption. The consolidation that followed over the next 2 decades is how the country went from thousands of scattered local credit bureaus to 3 national giants. TransUnion, which was originally a railroad car leasing company, purchased a Chicago credit bureau in 1969. Experian traces its roots to a group of tradesmen in Manchester, England in 1826. 3 companies with 3 completely different histories now hold 3 separate files on you, and they do not share those files with each other. And then there is the algorithm itself. In 1956, 2 men who had met at the Stanford Research Institute started a company together with $400 each. Bill Fair was an engineer. Earl Isaac was a mathematician. They had been doing operations research for the military, the kind of statistical modeling used to solve logistics problems during the war. Fair had an idea. You could apply that same mathematical approach to predicting whether a borrower would repay a loan. They pitched the idea to 50 lenders. 49 said no. The one that said yes was a small consumer finance company called American Investments. That deal became the first algorithmically scored credit decision in history. The company they built would eventually be called FICO, which stands for Fair Isaac Corporation. All right, the engineers who built this model were genuinely trying to make lending fairer. Before the algorithm, a loan officer made credit decisions based on gut feeling, personal impression, and in many cases, the race and gender of the applicant. Open discrimination was standard practice, a mathematical formula that applied the same rules to everyone. The Fair and Isaac model promised would remove that subjective bias from the process. They were solving a real problem, but the pool of borrowers their formula learned from had been shaped by decades of exclusion, and the algorithm learned from that pool. The FICO score weighs 5 factors from your credit file. Payment history, which makes up 35% of the score. How much of your available credit you are currently using, which is 30%. How long you have had credit accounts open. How often you apply for new credit, and what kinds of debt you carry, meaning a mix of credit cards, car loans, and mortgages. Here is what Fair and Isaac may not have fully reckoned with. The data their algorithm learned from was generated by lenders who had spent decades excluding minorities and women from the credit system. Bill Fair's statistical work identified that variables like payment history and credit utilization predicted default rates in the borrower population he was studying. But that population had been shaped by a century of discriminatory lending. It was the people the industry had already chosen to serve. Every variable that rose to the top of the model was a variable that measured behavior in a system that had excluded millions of people before the algorithm ever ran. Rent payments were not included in the score. Utility bills were not included. Phone bills were not included. A person could pay rent faithfully for 20 years, and none of it would appear in their FISO score. The things that were included were the things the financial industry had been tracking. And for generations, the financial industry had only been tracking the people it had chosen to serve. The algorithm was mathematically consistent. What it was consistent at measuring was who had been inside the credit system the longest and who had been built out of it. In 1981, FICO introduced its first credit bureau risk score. The company went public in 1987. The standardized consumer score from 300 to 850 arrived in 1989. And then came the moment that made it mandatory. In 1995, two government-sponsored enterprises called Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which together backed the majority of American mortgages, adopted the FICO score as the required standard for mortgage underwriting. Any lender that wanted to sell mortgages into the secondary market had to use the score. This meant every major lender in America had to use it. Yeah, no public debate took place, no vote in Congress, no public comment, period. A committee decision at two quasi-governmental agencies in a meeting the public was not invited to made a private algorithm the mandatory gatekeeper of home ownership in America. The relationship banker who had known your family for 20 years was replaced overnight by a number. The era of personal judgment in lending was over. All right, until Congress passed the Equal Credit Opportunity Act in 1974, it was perfectly legal in the United States to deny a woman credit without a male co-signer. A married woman's income often could not be counted in a loan application. A bank could legally ask a woman about her reproductive plans before deciding whether to give her a loan. If her husband died or left, the credit they had built together in his name did not transfer to her. She started from zero. Margaret Heckler was elected to Congress from Massachusetts in 1967. She was a practicing attorney. She was now a member of the United States House of Representatives, and she could not get a credit card in her own name. Okay, she joined the House Committee on Banking and Currency and spent the next 7 years working on what would become the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. Women's organizations were bringing what they called baby letters to congressional hearings in 1972. These were written statements that loan officers had required from women, promising that a pregnancy would not interrupt their employment. A woman of childbearing age was a financial liability in the bank's judgment. Women collected these letters and brought the pile to Washington as evidence. The Equal Credit Opportunity Act was signed into law in October of 1974. For the first time in American history, a woman's credit history was legally her own. But for the women who had spent decades as financial shadows behind their husbands, the damage was already there. At 50 or 60 years old, they were credit invisible, starting from zero as if they had never handled money in their lives. Credit invisible is the term for someone the credit system cannot measure. The score produces a blank where a number should be. A blank is treated as a denial. There are roughly 49 million credit invisible Americans right now, though estimates vary depending on how the term is defined. The total is in the tens of millions by any measure. And the people concentrated in that number are immigrants, young adults, elderly people who paid off all their debts, and people who grew up in households that operated entirely in cash. Take that last group. A person who has paid rent on time every month for 15 years has demonstrated financial reliability repeatedly, year after year. None of those payments appear in a standard FICO score. Utility bills paid faithfully for a decade, not counted. Phone bills paid without fail, not counted. The system rewards the management of debt. The moment you have no debt left to manage, the system stops recording your financial behavior entirely. A Vietnamese neuroscience student named Minh Nguyen came to the United States and applied for a credit card. Bank of America rejected her. PNC Bank rejected her. At the same time, institutions were comfortable lending her tens of thousands of dollars in student loans for medical school. She was not a financial risk. She was invisible to a system that was built for people who were already inside it. The cost of that invisibility is specific and quantifiable. A person with a credit score of 620 pays more than $87,000 more in interest over a 30-year mortgage than someone with a 760. Across all essential financial products, the annual penalty for having a low score runs roughly $3,400 more per year compared to someone with a 700 score. Over 30 years, that is more than $100,000. This is not a fee for making poor decisions. It is a fee for being outside the system or for arriving in it late. Now, let us talk about what the guardians of all this data actually do with it. On March 7th, 2017, a widely used software tool called Apache Struts publicly disclosed a security vulnerability. 2 days later, on March 9th, an internal email was sent to Equifax administrators directing them to apply the security patch. The patch was never applied. The email was never forwarded to the right person. On May 13th, 2017, a military research unit from the Chinese People's Liberation Army accessed Equifax network through that unpatched vulnerability. For the next 78 days, that unit ran approximately 9,000 queries through Equifax system. They routed their traffic through 34 servers across 20 countries to blend into normal network activity. They deleted log files daily to erase their trail. Yeah, on July 29th, a security analyst at Equifax finally noticed suspicious traffic. The breach had been running for 78 days. 147.9 million Americans' social security numbers, birth dates, home addresses, and credit histories were gone. These were not people who had made poor security choices. They were people who had never chosen to give Equifax their data in the first place. A lender had checked their credit at some point, which triggered the collection. They had no relationship with the company that now held their financial identity and had just lost it to a foreign military. The eventual settlement paid affected Americans a maximum of $125. The Federal Trade Commission advised people to take credit monitoring instead because the cash fund would be oversubscribed. The company that lost 147.9 million people's most sensitive financial data paid each of them roughly the cost of a nice dinner. Okay, the system that accumulated this power without a public vote is now quietly being revised without a public vote. On July 8th, 2025, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac approved a scoring model called Vantage Score 4.0 for use in mortgage lending. This is the first scoring model approved for conventional mortgages in 30 years that includes rent payments, utility payments, and telecom payments as factors. It scores 33 million more people than classic FICO. For the first time since 1995, a person's financial behavior outside the traditional debt system can count toward mortgage eligibility. In November of 2025, Fannie Mae dropped dropped its minimum 620 credit score requirement for loans processed through its automated underwriting system. For 30 years, 620 was the hard floor below which no conventional mortgage was possible. That floor is now gone. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the federal agency created specifically to oversee consumer financial products, filed a lawsuit against Experian in January of 2025. The suit alleges that Experian's dispute investigation process is a sham. Creditors' responses are accepted without independent verification, errors are reinserted after consumers successfully remove them, and the notices consumers receive after a dispute is completed are described in the complaint as confusing, ambiguous, incorrect, or internally inconsistent. Equifax was fined $15 million that same month for identical failures. 16 states have passed their own laws banning medical debt from credit reports. The federal government is now arguing that federal credit reporting law overrides those state protections. That fight is ongoing in courts. Louis Tappan was solving his own bankruptcy when he built the mercantile agency. The Wolford brothers were keeping track of which customers paid their grocery tabs. Bill Fair and Earl Isaac were applying military operations research to a department store problem. Fannie Mae's underwriting committee was trying to standardize mortgage risk across thousands of lenders. None of them designed what exists today. The credit score accumulated its power through their separate decisions made at different times for different reasons by people who never met each other. And by the time anyone understood what had assembled itself, it was already mandatory. The score that follows you through your financial life is not a permanent fact of nature. The same kind of committee decisions that made it mandatory in 1995 are revising it right now. The same institutions that built the room you were born into are today arguing about whether the room should be different. Your credit score reflects a history. It reflects which side of the system's design you were born on and how long your family was allowed inside it before you arrived. That is not unchangeable. The system is a set of choices, and choices can be made differently.